Hello, everybody. Welcome to Voices, or CEO Voices, as we dubbed this one, since our guest is someone that founded and runs a company that's successful and doesn't hurt people. And we want to know what they're thinking. I think everybody would like to know how someone in that type of executive position and founder position sees his organization and looks back on his success. This is our 97th Voices session. So I guess I have to have three more, but that's what it is. So let me just jump right in and introduce Joseph Wisne. Joseph is the founder, CEO, but now Chief Creative Officer, as he's setting his company up to be after him, of Roto Group, LLC.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here and squiggle around in your petri dish talking about this topic. At your disposal to answer any questions. Let me try to give you the context of what I have been doing over the last 20 years and the things that I've learned here. Roto is a design build company specializing in museums and exhibitions. We're the largest such company in North America, having grown from small to large over the 20 years we've been in business, about 22 years. Most folks don't realize, but when you go to a history museum or an aquarium or an attraction, those experiences, those exhibits, the interiors, the graphics, the interactives, the media are generally not designed or built by the museum itself, but are a service provided by others, kind of like the way a building is designed by an architect and then built by a contractor. So there's a whole specialty industry that serves the museum market space. And we do the design, the planning and the design, and also the execution of those experiences. So in the context of leadership and organizations, one of the things that I'm studying myself is the nature of creative collaboration across a large group. We're about 110 people doing around 15 to 20, 25 projects at a time. So the ecosystem is lots of cross-disciplinary work groups, trying to provide a fee for service for a paying customer over the course of a couple of years for each project. So some projects are late in their game, some are just getting started. We have employees that are all across the spectrum of experience, from beginners who are still learning to people that have been doing this for the whole of the 20 years that we've been doing it. And you've got a lot of human stuff going on there. The industry that might be the closest to this in terms of understanding the dynamics is filmmaking. I'm reading the book by Ed Catmull, the Pixar CEO. I learned an awful lot that sort of rhymed with what we do, because what you have is a intensive technical challenge. It's a creative one, of course, but no one person in that creative seat, even the director of the film, really has all of the purview and all of the knowledge and experience to know what to do next and how to bring all those pieces together. So you're ushering together these folks, and what you're producing together over long periods of time is something for public consumption. In other words, it's a thing, a work product whose values and quality will be noticed and commented on. So there's that additional pressure of success that comes with putting on a good show. And of course, you have the pressures of being on time and being on budget, which go along with the story. So that's the work that Roto does. I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, it's great. As I thought about potential areas of interest for this, I think that besides the industries that are obviously creative product industries, mainstream industries struggle with new product development and innovation in their organizations because their culture and their practices are so geared to execution. It's hard for them to break out of that and to look at themselves new. I think people will be interested in what it feels like to be a Roto contributor in terms of how that might apply in mainstream companies as well. So let's dive in. First segment, Joseph, you've said a couple times to me in our conversations and exchanges coming up here, how much you invested in the kind of the core process discipline of the company as a way, part of the success. And I think some people would say, hold it, process discipline sounds very rigid. It sounds very linear. That seems the opposite of a creative environment. How has process been important to you? What lessons do you have on that?
Yeah. Like any other, again, technically intensive collaborative work, you have to have some methodology to get from the beginning to the middle to the end on schedule and on budget. So just like architects have phases of their work, so do we. Our methodology is well defined. It's actually part of the contract with our clients. We do intensive training internally just so our own team knows what the language means, what deliverables are, and all that. So just there's a skeleton of work methodology that sort of frames the nature of what we're selling, frankly. But on top of that, you have, I guess, what I would consider collaborative technologies or tools that allow for there to be an exchange of creative iteration in the context of good decision making. For example, years ago, we ended up having the same problem that I think lots of organizations have, which is the sort of meeting gridlock, the notion that I need to get a hold of two different people in two different departments, and I need them at the same time, and they're not available at the same time except on Thursday. So we're going to book time together on Thursday. And then as you multiply the number of people in the company, the number of projects, the number of needs for that kind of touch base, everyone suddenly just has nothing but meetings. So our solution to that is to have embargoes throughout the day. I don't mean to make this about meeting reform, but it gives you an idea of what kinds of things are systemic here. At 1:00 every single day, we're not allowed to have meetings. And that way, every single person is free to collaborate in that 5-minute quick water cooler sort of way. It was really hard to pull off, to be honest with you, to convert the company to a place where it could do that successfully. Because as you probably know, if you don't have 99% compliance with a rule like that, you don't get the benefit of it because too many people aren't available. We've extended the hour a day to the whole afternoon now on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the purpose, again, of fostering this collaboration. So there's a real rigor around that. You have to live that value. You have to enforce it. You have to train it, like I said at the beginning. And then what you find is that people start to really believe in it and rely on it, and it becomes part of your culture. And then they're the ones protecting that practice. So those are some of the things that are coming to mind for me. There's many others that are more specific to the discipline that we're in. I think just to answer the question, and I'll shut up, about the reflection back on staying creative, that is one of our challenges. As we've gotten successful and gotten larger, we've been doubling down on how to run the trains, how to make sure we're on time, how to make sure we're making our margins and still delivering a good product to the client. So our reputation is maintained. We've gotten very good at the systems. And then we start to find that some of the exhibits are a little less innovative or a little less fresh. We're going through the motions because it's easier for the team to do the thing that they have always done. So it takes some intentionality to break that habit. And we're still working on ways to do that and get that pendulum to swing back more towards the middle.
Think of a story or an example of where you had to break that cycle, or that
Yeah, one of the things that's natural for an environment like ours is that you look at the project manager type, right? The employee whose job is to run the trains, and you think of that person as having these imperatives to make damn sure we're on schedule all the time. And then you have the sort of opposing tension in the creative, the person who's the designer and just wants to make it awesome. And the expectation is that the project manager will sacrifice quality for schedule, and the creative will sacrifice the schedule or the budget in order to get this dream done. And what we have found is that when you can empower both of those poles to fight the battle of the other, in other words, allow that project manager, who is a human being and comes to this work with just as much creativity as a human capability, as the creative person does, and you unlock that creative instinct, they want to make the exhibit great also. And they have power to do it. Why? Because they hold the key to the client decisions and the budgets and the approvals. So when you can unlock that desire in them, you get gains from it. And the other way too, when you coach the designers, they're in control of whether their design actually happens or not, because they're on time with it and because they're not designing over what could be afforded. When they learn that's a part of good design practice, then frankly, the entirety of the collaboration works together in this more synergistic way and not in this polar sort of tension. That's both theory, but also has specific practice in our work in terms of how we talk to each other.
how do the project managers approach that? How do they keep the pulse of whether we're creative enough or not?
we have a monthly all team meeting where intentionally we allow for there to be an agenda called the awesome updates. And we want the principals in charge and the project managers, people who are running the trains, to be the ones to speak to what's the awesomest thing that their studio or their particular work group is doing right now. And it's like a 1-minute update with an image. And because you're asking that person to nominate and then celebrate that collaborative achievement in progress, you, I don't know, in some ways force them to put on the clothes and the language of creativity and design, even though they're the project managers. You don't let them just rest in the sort of modality of being the spreadsheet person. Ask them to act like designers. In fact, we try to get everybody thinking like they're a designer here.
Brian, do you have any questions?
For me, like the two words that stood out are trust and synergy. And I guess how one is different from the other, right?
Got to think about that. Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about the interpersonal aspects of how we work when we're at our best. And that trust thing is big at the system level, at the larger group organizational level. Synergies are clearly a piece of it, but I'm working to connect those two ideas.
I get a little theoretical, but I always think that there's, in the ecosphere of leadership and stuff like that, people, they tend to take a dual position, one side or the other, that things have to be free and open and unstructured because you can't put creativity in a box, or you can script it. And I think the right answer is that you need a certain amount of coherence or structure to operate effectively in.
Right.
And I guess
it's the difference between, we're not a bunch of artists who are just supposed to come up with our own ideas and spend whatever amount of time we want inventing our own vision. We have a task and a work product, but you want to make sure there's space for the ultimate creative outcomes inside that. So it really is about the guardrails are the structure. Inside those guardrails, it's free form. I mean, that's one of the hardest things to do. You have a 14-week schematic design phase. And I'm trying to say, guys, we're not done until we're really super happy with these exhibit ideas. And even though you're now 10 weeks in, 10 out of 14 weeks in, if you're not happy, you're not done. You got to still stay at it. They want to measure progress and like check boxes all along the way, which is a little too structured, I think, for, again, letting that creativity really soar.
I think leadership is a creative process as well, because it's never one size fits all. It's every
Right.
situation has its appropriate response. And the response that one leader can provide is different than the response another leader provides. So the perfect analogy for me was a snowflake, because a snowflake is always ice crystals with 6 branches, but how it forms is always unique based on the conditions that it forms in. And I think it's that the structure allows the formation to happen.
Yeah. And someone said in the chat that a process or a constraint can fuel creativity, give people a set of parameters to meet. And they tend to get pretty inventive on how to do that. If anything is possible and there is no constraint, sometimes they just wandered for unproductively. You were talking about stories, and it didn't occur to me at the time you asked it, but one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm looking for metaphors. I'm looking for ways to help the team at large just internalize some of these basic values of how to collaborate creatively. One of these notions came from Rick Rubin's book. He's the music producer, and his whole sort of Zen-informed theory is that ideas are found in the world, right? You don't create an idea, you find it. It's out there anyway. Realized really helps us, because if you're a new person in the exhibit world trying to impress your employer, you think you're judged by how great your ideas are. And so you charge, and you're really eager to make sure your idea is the one we end up using. Well, it's all the wrong instinct, because chances are, being a new person, you're just not going to have the perception you're going to eventually have as you get a little bit better at this. So instead, you're just out there looking, you're finding stuff, you're offering. It's like a seashell on the beach. You're walking the beach, you're finding something shiny, you share it with your team. You don't have to own it. If it's no good and people aren't happy with it, drop it, look for something else, and you don't have that same sort of ego connection. And that's an active metaphor that we're teaching because we think it helps get people oriented correctly. But it's also a story. It's got traction.
Is it related to the fact that this idea of finding the stories or finding the seashells is we come to an idea The idea is like the last part of the step where consciously we see it, consciously we put some bounds on it, we give it a name. Oh, that's the idea. Before that, it might have been a feeling or an inspiration or an image or something
Right. Yeah.
that either can come from internally or it can be sparked by anything that we run into
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. Yeah. When we're designing an exhibit, a gallery might have 20 things, all of which have to start with an idea, a kernel of an idea. So you also have this multiplicity problem. I mean, you've got to be spinning a lot of plates. Certain things come to you pretty quick. Sometimes the client says, hey, we want to do one of these things. So one of the 20 things has got a pin in it from day one. The rest you have to go as you do them. The question becomes, when is it good enough? When is the idea you're playing with measuring up? And people want to try to judge the idea from the beginning. Is that going to be a good exhibit after 14 weeks of design? You often can't know that. You actually have to iterate it over at least some portion of that window in order to tell whether the thing had promise. So now you're fighting the use of time and resources by, are you iterating too much? Are you holding on to something that's just never going to get there? One of the values of leadership, though, is making those calls, is seeing how the team is doing and listening to their conversations and being able to help nudge. This one's got promise, keep going. Even though you're not there yet, it'll work out. And then maybe calling it on something else and saying, yeah, that one's probably not going to get there. And experience informs those kinds of decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think of the Prometheus choice loop, where it's this balance between what you have a handle on, what can you notice, versus when you should open further and explore further. And then that's all driven by where you're trying to get to. And to be the right magic in this case.
The loop idea, I think, is really resonating because, again, that natural sense of iteration and kind of every time you go back around again, you've learned something already, and now you're applying a different set of observations and insights. Plus, the thing itself, if you're designing it, it's moving along and becoming more clear. Also, you're inventing new flaws. This was in the Pixar book. They have a script for a film, and then they start laying out the characters and the scenes, and certain things don't work. Their job is to find the things that don't work. Imagine a culture which is about looking for the shitty stuff and then calling that out. But that's what makes the films better, because you're not stuck with the thing that just didn't work. It's hard.
Joseph, as he looks across all the people in his team who are trying to walk this balance between exceptional creative solutions and on time, on budget and structure, what does he observe about how they do that differently?
Yeah. Again, I came to this work as a museum guy, an exhibit person, and found myself running a company and then running these teams and then training other people to do that. And I don't know that I have any special skills in that. Tried to be a student of this. You all on this call probably have way better words than I will in terms of how to think about it. But what I could tell you in my own language is that everyone's bringing their own personality and their own self to the leadership challenge. Some of our folks are very process favorable. They like the rules. Their engineered brains like the fact that there's process and organization, and they get very upset when things are working outside of that. So their whole coaching and work that they're doing to become better at their stuff is to realize when is that instinct important and valuable, and they should lean in and insist that people are following the structure, and when is it really just their own reactions, and it's much more healthy for them and for everybody else to let go. And it's that letting go that is really a secret and hard for everybody to do. Don't have to fight every battle. We have some folks that are really personable and engaging and gregarious. Those folks really like the connection. They like being in the office together. They like that shared sense of collaborative spirit, and the work is hard. So sometimes our team needs the counseling and the pats on the hand and the pats on the back and all of the things the human things that come with encouragement. And those people naturally do that really well in sort of contrast to the others that I'm mentioning. So then you have work groups. So we're never hierarchical with a single point. It's almost always co-leading groups, both projects and also work groups. So you'll have the mom and dad problem where my supervisor is the disciplined one, and I really want to talk to the other one because they make me feel better about my work-life balance and things like that. So right away, you have those distinctions that we're present with all the time. You have young people who I see this sort of leadership potential in, And maybe it's my own naivete, but what I see is really good decision-making or really clear communication or just a really clear ability to be a connector of people's ideas, just inherent in their personalities. And you have this motivation to want to put them in position of responsibility. Why? Because they want it. Everybody wants a promotion. You get a promotion by moving up the ladder, but then you find yourself outstripping their experience. And that young person with those core skills just hasn't seen enough of the literal technical exhibit world to make the best decisions. And now all of a sudden their projects are floundering or they're behind or the client isn't happy and they start questioning their own value as a leader. And that sucks, right? To have someone with this promise that you're bringing along and then having a bad experience because you're either moving them along too quickly or not providing the right kind of support. I see that too. The age-old problem I'm sure every organization like ours has is you have the really good designer, the really talented designer who also then wants to move up, and then the talented person is running other people, and they're terrible at that. They're great designer, and they actually have really brilliant ideas, and looking over someone's shoulder, they can help inspire them, but they just don't know how to do the HR part. And that can be a real source of conflict. What do you do with that person who's awesome, but just not a good people person? So that's some of what comes to mind when you ask that question, Tom.
I have a comment question. I'm a museum professional and museum scholar, but what comes to mind when you were talking about the leadership potential and the challenge of rising is suggests to me that there's still, even though there's a desire to overcome the hierarchical element that's embedded in not in museums and all institutions, that it's difficult to alight it entirely. But I think there are other models that could facilitate that. And the thing that struck me was you mentioned questioning your own value as a leader. And the questioning value of one's own worth is a signal of the legacy of the post-Enlightenment paradigm, where the relative differentiation in the boundaries between disciplines, roles, industries determines who has power, authority, knowledge, expertise that's the most relevant. And when there's a rise in a structure like that that still has some rigidity, that's when that personal reaction happens. And so it can be an indicator of how can we adjust this move so that it's not just rise, but there's still lateral connections to support that. So it's interesting to hear you talk about from a larger paradigmatic position and how it manifests despite the best intention in practice.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have lots of great insights that I could use. If I'm thinking back on my own journey as a leader, I inherited probably as a child at swim practice, the paradigm of leadership as control. And so very hierarchical and very commanding. And then you find that doesn't necessarily always work or maybe never works. Fast forward really 30 years and experimented with all kinds of other models, including there is no hierarchy and the team is very egalitarian. And then how do they make decisions? How do they trust each other to make the right decision? And I don't think I have an answer to that, although this notion of the art director or the creative director as simply the observer through the team and doesn't have any power at all, but just has the experience and of reflection on maybe the past to notice things the team might not have noticed. And just that little prompting can be all that team needs to make really great choices without the power dynamic being the main driver. I don't know where the culture teaches people today what the leadership model should be for them.
Perfect. From a broader perspective, there's this tension. What is bearing this organizational weight and where the organizational effectiveness being sourced? And in traditional organizations, it's more heavily on the structure part, right? So the structure in a way is bearing this weight of creating spaces where people can be productive. But when we use structure only as like a second device and more we want to lean on this organic synergy, right, between people engaging in this creativity, the cultural element becomes much more important. And maybe the question from my side would be, you mentioned collective spirit, right? Which is an interesting term, Maybe could you elaborate on what you see necessary ingredients for a good collective spirit to emerge when people try to co-create something? And if you are intentional about cultivating this spirit?
I have a sort of a simplistic answer. Maybe I'll just give that and stop, and you can help prompt this. But one of the things we noticed is that when you are so process driven and success is measured by being on time, then it quickly can sap the sense of spirit and sense of purpose. And everyone knows in the bottom of their heart that we're not here to build exhibits for the client on time. That's not why they hired us. They hired us to make an amazing experience for their visitors. So when you can figure out what the amazing thing is, even early on in design, like the core scene in the film that you're writing the script for is really funny or enlightening or will be heartwarming, and people on the project can feel the promise of that. That fuels the sense of purpose and belonging and togetherness, and people then want to fight for it. So it's self-serving to come up with the really good ideas and help incubate those things in the middle of the team, because it helps erase some of the other stuff that can otherwise be baggage, people being tired or burned out or whatever else might come from that.
Peter, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Joseph, I'd love to hear, as you mentioned experimenting with different structures that are outside of command and control. And I avoid the word hierarchy, because I think there's plenty of hierarchies that have created distributed organizations. I think it's what we bring to it. But I think the magic in my research is in figuring it out. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your process of how you went and figured that out.
Peter, I wish I could have more time with you, because part of the challenge here, and I didn't say this at the beginning, but our company in part is successful because we take the three main chunks of museum work and put them all under one roof. We have a design capability, we have a fabrication capability, and we have the media, which is software, video, and it's all together in these various departments. And so the real leadership challenge and the project creative challenge is to get these cross-departmental things to happen where there is no command hierarchy. You can't command and control that way, but you still need things from each other. So how do you figure out how to get people to feel they trust, they have a shared vision, they're not working at counter purposes? Again, I think the best thing I could just reflect back to you that I've seen over the years that seems to work the best is figure out these cultural rituals that get them to nominate each other for appreciation. In other words, if I can nominate, we have a PUG award. It's a stupid history, but it's basically a kudos award. When everybody's together, all 100 people in one session, and they nominate each other for having helped each other out. Yes, there's benefit in the actual language of them doing that, but it's just the overall mood that it sets where, hey, we're all here together and we're not required to help each other, but man, is it more fun when we do? Isn't it more rewarding when we actually come across that way? I don't know. It's a simple idea.
Thank you.
Then it's like making sure you do full cycle. One of the things we also share is what is the social media response to the exhibits that have opened. So this is now after the projects are done. We can go back and say, look at how mom took video of the kids on the play date at the Children's Museum and all the cool things they said. They know nothing about us. They never will. But their kids had a great time. And that's that full circle payoff of, you see what we were working on the whole time? All that pain and suffering, all that creative effort was for this as an outcome. That's really been powerful. In fact, without social media, you almost never knew what the visitor thought. You knew what your client thought, but never what the people who were using the experiences thought. But that's a great way of feeding that culture.
I'm going to take that as a great segue into kind of the next segment. And let's how do you know you've got the right solutions? And so partly it's the social media feedback. Partly there's challenges going on in work in process. But tell us more. How do you know this is the right thing? And who knows it?
Yeah. Okay, there's a metaphor that I try to incorporate into some of the training, and maybe this is something you've heard before about. A bird in a cage is expected. A shoe in a cage is arbitrary, doesn't make any sense. An egg in a cage, that's art. And I use that as you can just imagine a bird in a cage, I get it, it's a bird. Shoe in a cage, doesn't make any sense. Egg in a cage, okay, it's that. The egg is becoming a bird that's born into a cage. Maybe that's the poetry. My point is this. everybody who sees that metaphor recognizes the same truth about where the value is. There's something universal about the egg in the cage metaphor that we all can agree on. So it does say that there is some common understanding of a standard of experience that would make everybody or enough people agree this is a good idea. Beyond that, man, it's really interesting to see how diverse opinions are about predicting when an early iteration of an idea is going to be successful or not. You have two different people, both with similar experiences and talent and past success stories, and with opposite views of whether this thing we're doing is going to work or not. So what I've tried to teach is don't judge it. Just iterate it, look for the flaws, look for the things that could become a problem, continue to make it better. We can always make things better. And then you got to be getting that outside feedback. Yes, your client has an opinion. They're going to share that with you. But your colleagues internally who aren't on the project, but are part of this world that we live in, can be really great mirrors for whether you got it or not. And that also helps instill, again, more sharing and more participation across the whole team.
How does that feedback happen, like quietly in the corners, or does it happen publicly, or how has that evolved in your culture?
Yeah, it doesn't happen enough, Tom, because honestly, there's too many things that need to be staged and looked at and talked about. One of the things that has helped is we've tried to stratify and say, look, we're going to put flags on every little component. The red flag things are the ones that need the focus and the attention. And we literally create an opportunity in the calendar to gather and look at the things that are red flags. The green ones and the blue flags are the ones that are supposed to be a little bit more routine. So you can sequester your time around the things that are most important. And I wish we could do more. I wish we could invest in that more. It's the ongoing challenge. There's probably not enough daylight shining on the really brilliant work that goes on in these small pockets that would be enlightening for the rest of the team to have seen and to learn about. But it's really just the project team that sees it. They're the only ones that are there having those conversations. So I don't know how to solve that. I wish I knew.
Yeah. If we walked into one of your project areas, how would we see the ideas? Is there a storyboard somewhere? Or
pre-COVID, you absolutely would walk through and see these bulletin boards with all this stuff printed and all this wonderful visual material everywhere. And that's where their meetings were. And people were here 5 days a week. And then the world changed. By the way, can I just make a comment about my leadership journey? So I was the CEO for 20 years, and about 15 plus years into that, I'm pretty good at it because we're successful. And then every single one of my clients closes because there's a pandemic. And I thought we were existentially going out. It was the hardest 2 years of my professional life. I never want to experience anything like that ever again. I didn't train for it. I had to carry all of the fears of the entire team for 2 fucking years. And I think that I'm still broken from that experience. I don't feel stronger. I don't feel like I was forged in any kind of way that benefited anything. But what we did come out of that with is way different tools for how this work gets shared. It's like this. We're on a Zoom call. Everything's a PDF. Things just aren't as visible as they once were. They're not as tactile as they once were. And we're hybrid. So 2 days a week, for the most part, people aren't even in the same building. That sucks. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, Tom, but just kvetching.
Yeah. What in the hybrid world or the virtual world, is there something that's working that you found for this?
Real-time collaboration tools are great. So when everybody has teams and there's a little light and the light's green, it means I'm not in a meeting. Awesome. We can chat. So that's the Slack modality of like water cooler conversations. Those work great. I used to not like the idea of the team creating their own organic like talking groups because I felt like they would waste too much time, like just having all the side chats. And I quickly realized that was the wrong instinct. Let them do it. And they're inventing all kinds of little stuff where they're sharing, things, and that's helpful. And they can cut and paste and snip and post things, and that's useful. It can get out of hand.
Yeah.
Honestly, the best time we have is our monthly all team where we with very strong intentionality, strategic intentionality, put that work in front of people on a big projection and constantly show them the best images and the best social media reports and the awesome updates. And everybody gives each other an attaboy. And that's where we recharge for the next 4 weeks.
One feel like people have to push through these barriers, these natural barriers that we have when we're, in other words, that it's not an environment where your response is natural. You have to be conscious about pushing these ideas forward or trusting your gut or something like that.
Yeah. We have a word called rigor. I struggled to figure out the right word, but it's better than the word discipline because discipline sounds more negative and militaristic. So rigor is just this concept of when you have a practice, simply do the practice and do it all the time. It's consistency a little bit, but that's gone a long way in helping people just stay on path and try to keep it simple.
Yeah. Is there a cultural thing where people say, hey, I need some creative feedback. I need some red flags.
Yeah.
Red flag time.
We do a thing called boosts, which basically is, look, my project is at a cul-de-sac creatively, and we're not sure where to go. And so they call a boost, and people from outside just come and chat. Again, as scales happen, those are harder and harder to maintain. I've now started a new thing I'm calling open tables. I'm not stealing the brand, but I am getting dinner with a group of interdisciplinary folks who I don't know very well, and they don't know each other very well, to have the 90 minutes or 2 hours to do something very intentional around creativity. I'm doing them every 6 weeks just to give those people yet another avenue of both reward and a chance to get philosophical a little deeper. That helps. And there's a few things like that we're doing.
Yeah. It helps because they know each other. And now they feel they have permission to be more direct in their
I
feedback.
think so, Tom. That's certainly one outcome I'm hoping that we start to see as we go forward. Yeah. Again, breaking people out of the Teams loop and the Zoom loops and the work from home laptop world where they just only ever do that. Getting them out of the house. One of the things we stand for is to create genuine human connection in the built space. And so be social, be multisensory together, and don't make them do it. It's an invitation, but most people so far seem really interested.
So people really struggle in this bigger companies still with this work from home versus work in the office thing.
Yeah.
And it makes so much more sense in a creative space when you could all get in the same room. But in building dog food and stuff,
People that are not in Columbus and they have to be remote, and we have to find ways to make that successful. But the most success are the ones that used to be here. And so they've made all those connections and friendships, and now they're living somewhere else, but most of the time because a spouse moved. But yeah, it can work.
my question, I guess, is I think of people withhold comment because they can't justify their thought or articulate it well. But their gut is telling them this isn't, we're not in the right place here, but they can't really articulate.
It's a great observation. And also there is the sense of who are the opinion leaders. I've just noticed this, and I did not expect it to be an important thing for good leadership success, but understanding who are the opinion leaders in your culture. And it's not even about the work. It's really just about the personalities that have the loud voices and can influence what people are thinking. If you're the passive person waiting to see what they think and you disagree, it's risky, socially risky to say, I think that we're fooling ourselves here. But we often are.
I think of anonymity, Joseph.
You think of what?
Anonymous questions.
Yeah, anonymity.
Anonymous red flags.
We do have what we term a question box, which is the little thing in the lunchroom where people just put the paper in and it's allowed to be anonymous. Most time people aren't asking questions. They're making statements. This is my opinion about something. It's mostly about policy or this or that. It's rarely about the actual work, but it's really useful. And also we read them cold. We pull them out of the box, read them out. Someone else reads them out loud. And I used to be the guy answering. Now Morris mostly does that, but we're like, hey, listen, open book. And people ask hard questions.
If you're having a big meeting, there's a technique. The specific one I'm thinking of is called 1, 2, 4, all. It's by a group called Liberating Structures, which is just a repository of group facilitation techniques. And it was started by the guy who was the president of Merck Pharmaceuticals back in the 90s. And he was a guest on Voices. And he said he had people all over the world. And he said, it was before the internet. He said, so you all could bring them together maybe two to 4 times a year. And so it became, how do you get a lot of conversation going in a very short period of time? And so this technique is meant to 1, 2, 4, all. It's one is the question might be, where should the red flags go in this project? And then you put 2 people together and they talk about it. So maybe it's not that opinion leader, it's the quiet people get a chance to talk. And then you put the 2s together, so you got a 4, and they talk about it and they come up with their top red flag or 2 red flags. And then you share that around the room or you make those things public. But He says, whether you've got 20 people or 2,000 people, you can get through that in 20 minutes because
Right.
you're doing everything simultaneously. So I don't know if
Yeah.
any techniques like that are
That's cool. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, deciding what's the important conversation, because you don't have time for everything, is also the challenge. What are the questions? And maybe, again, mining the team for what is it that they actually think is the most important and valuable, critical things to do is helpful. Yeah. By the way, I've been preaching this for a long time, but I think 3 is the magic number in a collaborative conversation. 2 can sometimes be overwhelming because the one person is the expert, the other person just shuts up. It's hard to do that in 3. When you get to 4, it starts to tail off. I love the 3-way. Awesome.
Okay.
I'm sure there's research to support that. Maybe there isn't, but there should be. Because again, if iteration is the key, right? You're going around on and making things better as you go. If you get to 4 or 5, anything beyond that, now everybody has to talk. It's just too damn slow.
And it's compact, right? It's like compacting.
And that's
It's-
important because if you're trying to touch enough stuff and stay productive, the compactness is what allows you to actually make aggregate progress across the whole enterprise. If you can just get people to think about it that way, rather than the standard thing, which is calling a meeting, it's an hour, we're inviting these 3 people, but hey, everybody else is on the optional list. And 6 of them come. And now you've got a much larger group. But how do you make that not a meeting, not scheduled, accidental, but with the right 3 people in 15 minutes?
There's a group practice kind of for people that are in the same place where you'll have topic tables, so to speak, and people are allowed to go from table to table for quick conversations informally.
Okay.
So there's no structure to it other than
Just
a
walk
general
over.
theme. If you were doing
And
a
there's
project, you
no
might have,
other structure. So there's not like someone is at that table all the time for continuity. It's really just about organic gathering, huh?
yes, that's true. You could have someone there that's a lead. So if you were, you could do it for anything. So if you're going to do it for project management, you could have a table on budget, for example. And so maybe you'd have a finance person there or something. But if someone had something that they wanted to ask or talk about or question that had to do with the budget, they'd go over to the budget table and see who was there and they would just talk it up.
What we talked about previously around what's happening inside our organization and the patterns inside. But we talk about creativity and creating experiences for people who have their own tastes and they are influenced by the prevalent culture in society. So we cannot really separate it. What we need to produce and what will resonate with our audiences, the experiences that we are trying to provide for them. What about extending the notion of intentionality towards our influence on the culture at large? And how would then this feed into the pattern within the company? We are the ones to cultivate cultural elements.
Yeah, there's a lot there. It's a big open-ended question. Let me just try to take a couple quick stabs at it. First of all, we have to decide what we believe the future of museums are, almost irrespective of what we hear other people saying, unless we believe that too for our own good reasons. And one of the things we've come up with is that people already have an instinct to go out into the museum world or an aquarium or whatever for social connection that is meaningful. They're looking to do something together. The social element that's within that visit is indelible to that experience. The other thing that it is multisensory. This is something we talk about all the time. Human beings evolve with the machine of the human body to walk and touch and see and hear, and it isn't the same on a phone. So it isn't about information. It's not about learning history or whatever, science. It's about this holistic human sensory experience with other people. So if they're already going there, maybe Roto's purpose, our why, is to empower our clients to really deliver on that promise, making genuine connections that are meaningful and social together. So if we can hone in on that, figure out what the secret formulas are for large success within the different genres that we work, and then make sure our team is really understanding the impact that they're having with their work by cycling back. That's one good formula for fueling this. I will say that one of the things that's hard is that the audience isn't monolithic. The visitor is not just one thing. People have all kinds of different tastes, to use your word. Some people like certain things more than others. So now you're looking at like diversity and versatility in your exhibit experience. So there's something for everybody. And that's sometimes the right way. Other times it's not. It means the experience is too incoherent and you need to do something that's a little bit more focused. But that's one place, is just to understand our place culturally in the larger spectrum and then do a really good job of delivering. As soon as we heard about Mark Zuckerberg inventing the metaverse and believing that we're all going to live the rest of our experience in metaverse, we knew from day one that was going to be stupid, that it was never going to work. No matter how high fidelity the experience gets, who wants to sit and live your life behind the mask? It also really fails to appreciate how subtle personal human interactions are with nonverbal communication and physical presence and sharing the air with somebody else across the cafe table. That's how humans have evolved. It will take an awful long time to replace that. It will have to be uploaded. Our consciousnesses will be uploaded to the cloud. Then maybe we can have a totally virtual experience.
Yeah, also came to my mind that how to make sure not to become groundless, to make sure that we are accounting for all the matters, and that's where ethics and morality come into play, which also links to like societal impact. And if we are more on the aesthetic side regarding creativity, how do we link it then to the ethical domain?
And unfortunately, U.S. museums are increasingly privately supported. They're not really government-based as much as they were back in like in the 30s when a lot of these institutions were founded. And so they're chasing the commercial tickets. They're catering to sponsors. I don't want to say it out loud, but one of the most prestigious science museums opened an exhibit about plastics sponsored by one of the plastics companies. And it's total greenwashing. It's terrible. The exhibit is anti-science and anti-ethics, but they got paid, so they went ahead and did it, and that's a bad sign.
So, Joseph, I've got a question that you talk a lot about genuine connection and experience in the built environment in terms of what you do as an org. And my takeaway from your last session was just how much the awesome meetings and the open tables and everything else is there to reestablish that genuine connections in the business, that I get an overwhelming sense of loss from a hybrid working practice. And so could you talk to maybe what was in place pre-COVID? And so that, because there's a sense that these are replacing some things that are naturally lost through this new working practice, virtual working, Teams, Zoom, etc.
Yeah. A little bit of the victim of success, because the larger you get, frankly, the more, I don't know, machine-like and corporate the sort of the culture can get, and the more of the people who are contributing in this environment are remote. They don't really know people. They don't go out for a beer afterward. You're missing some of that connectivity. We used to have departments, and we, a long time ago, reorganized under studios, because studios could take all the disciplines that were design, project management, architecture, all that, put them into smaller work groups, and was hoping to recapture that small company entrepreneurial sense. But now the studios are like 20, 25 people each, and some of that small thing is still lost. You give things up when you get too small, flexibility and some depth. I don't know. I do think that the cultural practices and following the team's instinct in doing things after hours that do require them to be present together are always worth investing in. One of the studios put on this, they called it drunk PowerPoint. It may be an internet thing. I hadn't heard of it before, but you get to get in a room with your colleagues, and everybody who wants to do it puts together like a 5-minute or 4-minute little PowerPoint thing on any topic they want. And you see all this amazing compassion and creativity, and people are being inappropriate in certain ways. And honestly, it just really feeds the sense of why we're here together. That only works in a physical room with beer.
Yeah. And also in a psychologically safe environment, which is also very, so yeah. Okay. Beer always helps.
We've talked a lot about the cultural aspect and relational, and I'm curious about if you've tracked or have a sense of the ROI from a more business perspective, and even if it's not like quantitative, but in monetary or financial quantitative, client retention or acquisition.
Well, we do measure things like tracking our clients that might have used us years ago, because most of the museums, they don't have projects all the time. They'll do something and then it'll be 5, 6, 7 years before there's another project. How often do they come back? That's something we measure as a way of, did we do a good job really or do they just say we did? And if they come back and use you again, that's good. The team investment's really the key though for that. And most people who come in here aren't trained in exhibits. They learn it while they're here. So what's the retention? How effectively can they move within our world into the areas that they feel they're most pulled towards? And can we help become, frankly, purposeful for them? We exist for our client, we exist for the owners, we exist for the visitors, but we also do want to exist for the team and be the place where they can be their best selves and exercise their best talents. So retention's important. We try to measure that. Yeah, that's what comes to mind in terms of ROI. And yet, you said it's not financial, it's human capital. It's the feel good that people stay and they say good things about working here. And they have their own social media feed where they're proud of what they're doing. That's important to us.
And are you using traditional KPIs or?
There's already a lot of KPI built into the project environment, the budgets, the schedules, and things like capacity. When you're asked to design an exhibit or an experience, you've got parameters that are quantitative. How many visitors per hour go through it, and those things can be measured.
Have you invented maybe some of your own measures?
Invented some KPIs? Let me think. What you wish is that the world of visitor studies was richer and less anecdotal. So you really had an idea of the impact you were having. There are firms that are specialists in studying visitors and understanding the dynamics of those visits and the outcomes, but it's not cheap. We do an in-house program in partnership with local schools where we bring in classes of kids and they play with prototypes, and then we watch and measure them. And some of that's quantitative, like how long are the kids sticking around? That helps. That's an evaluation technique. Works pretty well.
Oh, it was maybe more going in the direction of our internal efficiency, yeah, of how to keep people productive, yeah. This creativity and this.
The tools are available to us as an employer to see how people are staying in their software. And I'm banning that. I don't want management to use that as a way to understand what people are doing. I think it's just too much of a double edge to that.
Interesting.
Spyware. I'm not sure if that's what you were thinking, but measuring ROI productivity on people staying in here. I know for sure that people aren't as active on Mondays and Fridays when they're working from home. But you don't have to have software tell you that.
Because I can imagine that in creative, you kind of want to enter these flow states where the productivity can get exponential. And you want to create, as an employer, as good conditions for that to materialize as frequently as it's possible. Are you doing that? Or?
One of the things that comes to mind for me there is to identify the team who feel like they have a sense of that and then empower them to do the thing that they have an instinct for. So one of our designers loves the idea of, hey, I'm going to do my work, but in one of the conference rooms. I'm just going to bring all my shit in there. And I want you to do your work in there. Just come for the afternoon and do your work with me. And we're just going to talk about sitcoms and talk about other things that are in life. And we're just going to work. And what happens is they start helping each other with the work. It's kind of going back to the old model of we're all just working around big collective tables so we can just have a chat rather than office cubicles.
We've already gone here, but I just want to go back to the conversation we were having before the last breakout about finding the problems and giving them attention, the red flags. And so my question was, I think in a lot of times in group discussion in businesses and problem solving and decision making, people don't speak up. What's your observation there? And do you have any techniques around that or anything, Joseph? What do your leaders do?
Yeah, I mean, it's informal, Tom, but again, try to get that group who's there for collaboration to be very intentional about listening. And that means shutting up. We all assume that the information we have is all the information there is, forgetting that there's all this other perspective that we're just not aware of. So we literally don't know what we don't know. And we try to train that with a little bit of metaphor. So the notion is the three people in the room collectively are seeing the 360 that they wouldn't see if it were just two of them or one of them by themselves. But if you're not listening and you're not exchanging, you never see that additional perspective. I, as a facilitator, I'm very deliberate about asking people to speak who haven't spoken. That does put people on the spot at times, and sometimes they're not comfortable with that. I feel like we probably could unpack this more, for sure.
It reminds me, there's a researcher that I use a lot with clients. Anita Woolley is from Carnegie Mellon, and she's part of this MIT collective intelligence thing. And so she does these really, I like it because she does these simple studies and she brings people together to do joint projects, take an IQ test. And then she says, what are the characteristics of the groups that score really well and not score really well? And one of the things is how smart they are individually is not the predictor of how well they'll do as a group. It's the diversity of their perspectives is one. And the other one is their social IQ or empathy IQ. So they're the type of person that will notice when someone else's body language or their expression, and they'll say, you look like you have something to say about that, and making sure it gets said.
Tom, you invoked empathy, and I want to just maybe make sure I'm saying out loud how valuable that has been for our practice, or just maybe my own sense of what effectiveness would mean for me in my role. I've been reading George Saunders, who's the American author, fiction writer, talking a lot about kindness and differentiating that from being nice. But what is kindness? And it's just this world just needs a hell of a lot more of that. Maybe it's true our employees and our clients and maybe who the visitors that are coming to our experiences just need more of that. And that goes a long way. And it's very simple. It doesn't have a lot of fancy philosophy behind it, but just being kind, empathetic. Hard to live that.
Back in my college, engineering students could never graduate, couldn't get their diploma unless they had achieved a good grade in the small group communication class. It was a mandatory course and all the engineering students had to take it.
Joseph, if you were giving advice to some go-getter who was going to found their own company about how to lead that company or how to lead them through that, what are some of your lessons there that you would want to make sure they understood?
I would certainly share the lesson I learned from you, one of those lessons that you share with me over the years, Tom, and that is know thyself. If you're going to be effective, you really need to know your own, what makes you tick, your strengths, of course, but also just where your own blind spots are. I also think you have to surround yourself with talent. Everybody knows that, but people are the answer to everything, including and especially these external technical design things that are out there in the world. It's all people stuff. As much as I love AI and the promise of AI, I don't worry at all about being replaced. I feel like our work is fundamentally human in its nature. And we have these wonderful tools out there with AI that are going to help us be more productive, but it's the people thing. Be willing to work hard. I don't know, there's no free lunches.
One of the things I've heard Joseph say is that, and I think this is the organizational challenge, what he does for his clients, he does for his organization. And I think so few organizations do that. When he talks about the experience, the built environment, everything he's trying to do outside with purpose and intention, he's doing inside with purpose and intention. And that's something that I'll leave with we serve our clients and often forget ourselves. Joseph, what my takeaway is, seems to me to be working really hard to do that in both spaces. And that's really big.
Thank you, Les. As I reflect, I do think I'm the kind of person that likes to know why it is we're doing what we're doing. So if we can find that core, that center, and pivot off of that for work, life, family, relationships, marriage, that's good. You're all so smart. Gosh.
I want to hear from Val and Thomas because I haven't heard your questions yet because they haven't been in your groups, but I bet you've got a good one or observation.
I've been fascinated. This is my first meeting with this group, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, Joseph. I think there is something that I'm curious about, and that is how much fun and laughter is there in the company?
That is so insightful. It really is. It's hard what we do. I think people maybe would say that. Like I said, the work product is a public thing that people judge. I think we all are familiar with the idea of going to a film or watching a movie and frankly thinking it sucks and saying that out loud, boy, that was awful. And yet the people that made the film are really good at filmmaking. We have this risk that the work's not going to be accepted or as well embraced as we hoped after 2 years worth of effort. So in that context, I think a little bit of frozen snowball theory, which is the idea that, hey, Some point in the future, the Earth's going to be a frozen snowball floating in space. It doesn't matter what people think. We have to have fun while we're doing it. It's a really good perspective. I don't know how to quantify joy, but it feels like it's a good thing to get more of.
I think joy is in the current moment, and what you've described so beautifully is that connection. I do have an insight where I believe that we can have a lot of that connection hybrid, and we can create, there are very creative ways that we can create connection across the world with groups. But it's been really informative and interesting. And I've a lot of admiration for what I've heard tonight.
My closing question will be, what are the top 3 hacks to disconnect from our existing mental models and habits related to leadership and management? If I'm coming from a certain mindset, mental model, also habits regarding how to lead and manage, how do I best disconnect from them so I can explore and learn and embrace other ideas and qualities?
I got to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're no good if you're burned out, and it's easy to get burned out.
Yeah.
With the burdens of leadership, so-called. So you got to be there first. Pay attention to your own relationships and your own balance. Do not chase the little things. Again, life is really short. I'd try to have not a fatalistic attitude about it, but you're only here for a certain number of years, and then that's it. So don't sweat the little shit.
Yeah.
And I think I go back to the empathy, kindness thing as the third hack.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answers what you're asking me, but I feel
No,
like
that's good. And you
human
also, your previous
relations.
songs are about laughter and having fun and creating energy. I think maybe also a clue.
The hardest thing is, in my perspective, is putting aside how well you're performing and focus on how you're setting things up for other people to perform.
I put a note to you in the chat, Thomas, but I think building on what Tom said, I think it's about not necessarily what you do, but what you bring to it and how you manage your own relationships and what you bring to your work and put into it. It still has a lot of impact on the people around you and can affect the work and how they do their work.
One of the early lessons of leadership I learned is it's not about you.
The follow-up question is, how can you help others do the same thing? Because we tend to be stuck in a autopilot and cognitive biases and so forth. So there is a lot of gravity towards more of the same. So how do we get out of that stuck? Yes.
My experience over 20 years has been that breaks down, and even in some that are firmly entrenched, because they eventually see the authenticity of it and the value of it for themselves. And it's a lot less exhausting to maintain a friction than to let it go.
You make a good point, and some of us have been participating in these warmer voices sessions that we had last year. And I instinctively, to one of my earlier points, I think it has something to do with breaking down these barriers within organizations and creating connections in a virtual environment, although I can't quite connect those dots and argue for it. But the experience, I think, is one of listening to someone else in a way that you hadn't before, because you're putting aside the ideas and the work, but also then listening to yourself. And so there's this different experience of listeningness, I'll call it, that practice sparks, which for some reason opens up people to one another. Not that they're not being confessional. I don't mean by that by opens up. It's just that they're somehow paying attention to each other in a way that wasn't happening before. If I have an aspiration from a Prometheus standpoint, it's how can I figure out how to get some companies to try that? Because it gets tried out in the kind of fringe areas, right, of the world, but does it happen inside organizations? I think it would be an interesting thing to add into the culture of an organization or into the tone setting of an organization.
I'm an ethnographer. I took a course with someone in an ethnography and industry group I'm in, and what he's repeated every time was self as data. And initially, a lot of people didn't really grasp what that meant, but what you described is very much that, just listening to yourself and examining yourself and the role you play in the interaction.
Jonathan, you want to ask the last question or make the last comment and then for us tonight?
I don't know. Appreciative, yeah. I just posted a thing on Substack on leaders create the weather. And the comment from the Liverpool Football Club, I'm about to watch Champions League tonight, people were writing about the pressure there is in the environment to give quick answers, solve things fast, and react to the latest thing. There's no sense of taking a longer view. So these phrases of calm doesn't go viral and patient doesn't trend, to go countercultural to enable that kind of environment isn't something that's taught in leadership schools or courses at all, but comes through very much in this lived sense of practice you're describing. Much more curious about and interested in the subtle ways in which you are directing attention and energy, not just through the words, but through all those kind of subtle cues that enable people to feel psychologically safe without having to have a course or a workshop on it.
Yes, interesting, Joseph. Who are the people that make people feel safe enough to engage?
My brain is going similar spot where, who gets the attention is who's the talker. What gets the accolades is the energy, is the dynamism. And we think that's the sign of creative progress or success, where at least half the people in the collaboration are introverts and are contemplative and they're quiet, and the calm for them and the sense of contemplation is where the value is. How do you have a conversation where people can just be? The people here who I sense get the most other people informally connecting with them. In other words, there's magnets for connection, are the one-on-one empathetic hand patters. And maybe that goes without saying. It's not the experts. It's the empaths, the connectors.
But not just storytellers. I think part of it is by listening carefully, you can reframe and recontextualize to add richer meaning to what people are bringing and help them come away with a bigger and better sense of what they're doing and why and how it fits.
I found was when I was working with artists as a curator and doing studio visits, I worked very relationally rather than object-based. And so as we're talking, they were like, you made me understand my work a lot better. And because they embody it and it's what's internalized, you don't always see, but it is authentic. So, and it was a nice kind of, it's those different perspectives forming a whole.
I think part of what you're describing, Kinsey, at least in my mind, is when people who have a good way of naming the essence of what you're fumbling around with give you a more dense tool conceptually to use. Say, yeah, that's what I mean. And then you have a clear, simple way of taking and transferring it into another context, another situation. But until you have somebody scaffold your conceptual sense making and understanding, you're still looking for that.
Yeah, I have all this that's part of the sense making, and other people can see like the sense in the pieces. That's
and even if the other person can't help you name it, them giving you the space to articulate it is helping you. You walk away and suddenly it's clearer to you, or you've got a piece of it.
Well, what is it that I'm saying?
That's a great way of phrasing it. What is it that you hear me saying that I can't quite articulate? This is what I'm getting from it.
And then I can say, no, that's not what I'm saying. Or yes, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Now we are out of time. And so thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Tom. That was great. Take care.
Thank you.
Good to see you.